Thanks for coming back in a timely manner. I appreciate everybody making an effort to be back on time. We're going to start with the second half of today. I'm going to be talking about the Laura Robb book that you brought with you, the reading strategy lessons for science and social studies. Now, there's a PowerPoint on the back table, that a handout that goes with this. But honestly, instead of looking, you might make notes in the PowerPoint, but I would find some sticky notes. And if you brought your book, get your book, and you could tab things that you might want to try. That always works for me. Sometimes when I come back with a handout, it ends up in a stack of my handouts. And I find it a few months later, and I go, oh, there's that handout. But if I make notes in my book with sticky notes and whatnot, I might be more likely to use it. We had the privilege, when I say we, a lot of literacy teachers had the privilege of going down to Atlanta and meeting Laura Robb and listening to her speak. Just to give you a little background, she is a teeny tiny older lady. How old do you think she is? 75 years old. Okay. She has taught school pretty much every grade level. She still volunteers and teaches at her grandchildren's school. Is she in Virginia? Why am I in Virginia?
You're right.
In Virginia. And she was just a neat lady, and she is a straight shooter. Told us exactly what she thought about the Common Core standards and is definitely on board with the rigor that says we have to build background for these kids. We can't just expect them to go from what we were doing with Georgia Performance Standards in the literacy part to where Common Core is asking them to go without everybody, all the content areas getting on board and teaching these content literacy standards. So we ordered these books with Striving Readers this year. We ordered this Laura Robb book and then a thicker one. Well, I picked the small one because it was easier to read when Cassie asked me what I would like to do this afternoon. I went for the small book. We'll get into the thick book later. It's a lot of the same stuff, but you'll notice when you flip through this book, she lays it out. She gives you some background about how it's organized. She has before reading, during reading, and then after reading lessons. I think there's a total of maybe 15 in the whole entire book. But she lays it out with a lesson plan that has a purpose and then a procedure. And I don't know, I love things that are labeled with like number 1, number 2, number 3, where I can read it very quickly and it's not a lot of paragraphs. I think these are doable. So my presentation, I basically picked out, I went through and highlighted all of them so you would have an overview of each one. But then I picked out a few that I would like us to maybe try together that I think would definitely be ones that you could take back and do immediately in your classroom if you chose to do that. So we'll get started. Okay, this comes right out of her book on page 5, Why Teach Reading Strategies in the Content Areas. And I think that most of us would agree that content areas, reading is everywhere. You're going to read and write in every single subject, and we need to teach them how to use strategies across the board. That they don't just use those strategies when they're reading for pleasure or reading in reading class. Nonfiction is a huge shift in Common Core. We're going to be devoting more time to nonfiction. So making sure that our students realize that what they're reading in science and in social studies, that that's nonfiction as well. It's amazing. I've spent some time in some different rooms this year asking them to just give me, brainstorm some ideas about what nonfiction books are. And they rarely mention their science or their social studies textbook. And when you say that's a nonfiction book, they're like, oh yeah, it is. But they just don't think about it. So if we can get them thinking that what they're reading in their science class and social studies class is just like the nonfiction books that they're coming to the library and getting, but it's all compiled into one source, then we definitely are ahead of the game with our kids. I'm going to let you read that. I'm not going to read it to you. Read that. week, and I want you to turn and talk to the people at your table and discuss things that jump out at you in this quote from Laura Robb. If there's some things that you think absolutely I agree with, or maybe things that you don't agree with. Take a minute to talk to the table.
I think kids don't always transfer what you think to an area. You do need to do this.
I think it's totally separate.
Yes, you need to do sure.
As evidenced by the fact that you can be a content area teacher and then they can go to the reading teacher and do a quick read or something else like that. So they're working with some of these books for the grant. Come back to you and go, something will pop up in a lesson and you go, oh, I know that because this so-and-so reading told me.
Yeah.
Okay, that's why this is one story build. They don't recognize their text, but they're looking for the mouse and the YouTube button on their text.
I hear some really good discussions, and I noticed I stopped at 3 different tables, and everybody was talking about the same part of this passage. Would anybody like to share what they were discussing at their table? I want to see if anybody picks out what I noticed was being discussed at some other tables. Would anybody like to share what they were
Reading levels.
Reading levels.
Talking about reading levels. They come to us with, I mean, the pre-Kers come to pre-K with less of a vocabulary knowledge than you did 10, 15, 20 years ago. And they don't even speak to you in complete sentences. It's usually 1 or 2 words. It's like they're on a 2-year-old level or worse. That they don't have the they don't even have, the brains are not even wired for the vocabulary.
Right, and that's exactly what I stopped at this table. They were talking about reading levels. West Central, Maine, and Southeast were talking about reading levels as well. I know that with the series Rome City Adopted, it comes with some leveled text. It's not the textbook written in different levels, but it comes with some leveled text that are supplemental materials that go with it, but it's not going to teach all of your content. Do you have a resource that you have found, your interactive text that you use, do you find those on different levels?
They, on the same CD-ROM, they do have different versions of the interactive text.
And that's in 6th grade?
6th grade.
Okay. What about for the 3rd through 5th? Because I know we have a different series than they do in 6th grade. Have you found access to reading materials that on different levels that accompany the textbooks besides the supplemental little skinny books that we got?
It's called headhelper.com.
Headhelper.
So another place. Ms. Bailey?
Then the Striving Readers Grant out of some, but it's like 1 copy of each level, so
Right.
it's kind of difficult.
Right. We at Elm Street purchased a guided reading library, and we've been going through trying to pick out the books that go with social studies standards or math or science standards, which is a huge task, but we're trying to find things that teachers can have in their rooms, put these books or articles in the students' hands that they can read, that have readability on all the different levels in your room. You should be receiving Lexile scores for your students. Probably your literacy teacher goes and takes them to take SRI, but those scores should be where everybody can have access to them, and we have material in all the classrooms that are on the ranges of all the students in your class. So just make sure if you have not seen those, ask your coach, ask the literacy teacher at your grade level if you can see the SRI score so you'll have a better idea of what to have in your room. All right. You know, with the different instructional levels, I think about some of the strategies that we've been presenting and jigsawing and putting them in collaborative groups to get through the text. Are you familiar with the read, write, talk strategy? Okay, so read, write, talk, modeling that for them, allowing them to go back and do it. And if you've watched the PALS module on comprehensivereadingsolutions.com, it talks about a way to group those students where you have, you know, your abilities like 1 through 10, and then you cut the list in half and pair them up so they're more equally matched instead of having a really high with a really low. That's a good strategy to use in all subject areas when you're going to have them reading material and letting them discuss it and make notes, ask questions, find words that they don't know, that are new to them, that they would like to know more about. So make sure that you're trying to use that as well. Ms. Sweat, did you have something more to add?
That's what I was going to share. That's worked really good. I got that list from my reading teacher, and I kind of have compared in threes, and it just seems to work really good. So so kind of a high, middle, low.
That's great. Good.
Mr.
So,
Bowen is doing, PAL is very successful.
okay, so you use that in science a lot too.
Science and social studies.
Great.
And the kids are, very quietly coming up saying, oh, we love this, this is great.
Good.
I love the shrinking and the summarizing.
Yes.
And I created a rubric where I just walk around and I listen to the kids and I have a marker. I just mark the box, that I'm observing.
Good.
And then I ask questions at the end of every, maybe a couple of paragraphs. And if they answer a question correctly, they can put a check mark under response. As part of the
Awesome. And you're sixth grade, right?
sixth grade.
Has anybody had success using PALS or something similar to PALS in a lower grade level? I know we talked about it on Elm Street. We had a grade level meeting one afternoon where we watched PALS, and my third grade teachers kind of felt like, this might be a little too difficult for them, but we talked about modifying it. And I was in Anita's room one day just dropping by, and they were doing some partner reading, very similar. She had them timed, doing certain tasks at certain times, reading, then discuss summarizing and retelling and things like that. So I think it's something that if it doesn't work for your kids the way it's laid out in the module, you can definitely make it your own. And it just gives them a little more of a purpose for reading. They've got things they have to do. On the RCSE file, if you know how to get to that, if not, I can show you. But Kay Sherritt, I believe it was Kay, made a PALS timer that she posted. And it's a smart notebook file, and it has every single part of PALS, and it tells the directions at the top of the slide. So you don't have to know as the teacher, you don't have to have it memorized. It will say, partner A reads, and then you push go, and it's 2 minutes. Then it will say, partner B reads. So it gives you the directions, and I suggest that you take a look at it, let your kids try it out, and if it doesn't work, tweak it, but there is that timer there for you.
How do you get
Do
to
you know
that?
what folder that?
I will show you how to get to the e-file after we get out of the presentation. Please don't let me forget, but the technology, we think today it's been a little slow, so if we get out of this, I'm afraid we won't get back in.
If we can see which folder that
Yes.
timer is in, Mr. Bowen has expressed willingness to share his rubric.
Awesome.
And I could post his rubric.
That'd be
to the
great.
file.
That'd be absolutely
Same
great.
Wherever the.
Okay, yeah, when we finish this part, we will, as we're transitioning to our last activity, I will pull the PALS timer up and show everybody how to get to it, how to get to that e-file. Okay. All right. So she has a 3-part learning framework, and I've discussed it earlier. Before reading or preparing to read, during reading, and after reading, okay? To prepare to read, you're building the background, like Ashlyn was talking about earlier with the pre-reading strategies for vocabulary. I think we all know that we're going to have to lay a pretty strong foundation for our students and build their background, really when it comes to social studies and science vocabulary, because they don't have these conversations at home. They don't have people that are discussing scientific things or historic events at home. They don't. And so a lot of what we bring up to them that we may take for granted and think that they should know a little bit about, they don't. So the more you can build the background and relate it to their life, the better. I think we all know that. During reading is just about self-monitoring. We can't just set them free and let them read and assume that they're checking for understanding and monitoring themselves. We have to give them strategies and teach them how to monitor comprehension as they read and make sure that they're understanding. And we'll go through some of her lessons for that. After reading, that's just where you're really building those connections. Okay, we've read this, now what? What does this relate to? What else do I know that goes with this? Can I summarize this? And that's when those strategies come in as well. Reading to learn. She just talks about what I was saying earlier. The science and the social studies textbooks are great examples of informational nonfiction texts. It's amazing, like I said, that sometimes students don't realize that these books fit into that genre. Nonfiction text features. We're going to be doing a lesson together in just a minute on text features. That's a standard at pretty much every grade level, a literacy standard, having them use the text features to help them build background, know what they're going to be reading. Laura Robb has a great textbook scavenger hunt that we're going to do. I asked you to bring a textbook from your grade level. If you didn't, we can move around and get with people. You don't even have to be with your grade level, so we'll make sure that you have what you need to do that. Some of the nonfiction text features that she points out: sidebars, diagrams, tables, graphs, and charts, photographs with captions, maps, a glossary, an index, different types of print, and timelines. I know that a few years ago, we were in the library doing a CRCT prep game for language arts, and it asked them to identify what part of the definition, it was a dictionary entry, what part of the definition was in between brackets. Every person in the room missed the question because they didn't know what a bracket was. And these were 5th graders. They knew what a parentheses was, but they didn't know what a bracket was. And so we had to get the pointer, Mr. Williams, and show them it's just like a parentheses, but it has a straight edge. And they, oh, that's a bracket. So we really take that for granted. But as all those things are in our science books, so you can really support the literacy teacher by just making sure as you're reading and going through the book that you are pointing out those features and helping them know how to read them. I taught a lesson in 4th grade about a week ago, and it was about reading diagrams. And we used a lot of science and a lot of math, but it was just amazing at how, reading a table, and it was a big table, it had a lot of different columns. And then figuring out, to put their finger at the top over here and then find what they were looking for, going down the rows and making their fingers meet in the middle. I mean, it was just easy things that I thought were easy, but for some of them, they had never really been explicitly taught how to read those things. So as you know, especially in science, tons of math, tons of charts, tons of tables. They're going to have questions that really aren't even science questions that they have to answer. It's probably going to be math related, but if they don't know how to find the information in the table or the chart or the graph, they're not going to be successful. So we can really support by teaching that in the content areas as well. All right, this is going to be our first activity. It's called the Textbook Treasure Hunt. It's on page 13 of the book, but I copied it for you so you don't have to write in your book. Now, I'm not expecting everybody to fill one of these out, but I just want for maybe each table to do one together, just so you can have some background with it. You'll know if it's something you like and if it's something you want to try, but it really gives them the opportunity to go through their book and see if they can locate different text features. Do they know where the index is? Do they know how many pages are in the index? I think it will be a valuable activity really for all grades. I see it as something that we could use at the beginning of the year as they're previewing their textbook for the entire year. This might give you purpose for previewing the text instead of saying, get out your science book, let's take a picture walk and just go through it. This will give them a purpose for the activity. So I'll bring these around and we'll spend maybe 10 minutes on this.
Good time.
Good time.
It's on, but I'll be editing this part.
Jennifer, going to bring these around. I'm going to give you each one just so you have a clean copy, but maybe if you would just do one within your group, that would be great. Ms. Morrison. And the lunch. I think. I'm going to get
That was Aaliyah Plant.
What?
We were at school that day, and I don't know what you're talking about.
I do. See, I don't know. That was talking about telling her how awful her standards are.
That's pretty awesome.
That's what's all in that interactive. I had one class with engineering last year that was and I already knew about interacting over here using it because there's friendly stuff. She showed me a couple of old how to do it. Got to know each other.
She's done that
was about
well, this is your first year.
I knew about
Textbooks are on the way.
She's a nice lady.
How many pieces of paper? It's just 2 pieces of paper all set.
And you did use your thumb to manage.
Oh, this was in her book when she was in her book. Please write that. Yes.
That's just 2 pieces.
Have them write it. Absolutely. Like give them the picture. What is this? Yes, I agree.
She likes you.
And it's a sequence.
I have that before. I just
Right.
See, they don't really have to know how to write. Yeah, so they do. Soul fertility, like.
That'd be a good quiz right there, something like that.
Fill it in themselves. That's what I think. It should be in their own words. We did.
Everybody's gotta use their own words.
Yeah, this is cute, but it would be better if they have to know words. They'll learn more from it.
Anytime you write
Like, I don't teach it. That isn't really part of soil yet. Oh, I know what it is.
Right. See, I want to ask you, she could price tab at the end of
Instead of,
Little kids, it's some of the more
what?
so actually,
Who did that? But no, but that time is coming up, right? No, it's not. It's taking possibly 2 months, depending on, you can't do 2 minutes. Semi-finals to what? How did she? Wait a minute, how did she? From where?
from last year, she told me.
Oh, she died. Oh. Some of those quick spells.
$4 at the store. How many pages are there?
Maybe she'll just tell me that.
The size.
We have iPads. They don't come.
Deborah has tried. She has the officer around all day. I don't get him until forever. Yes.
He looks very old. Yeah, yes. That's right. As always, as always, it's Tuesday. Making excellent choices. As always. Boys and girls making excellent choices.
Well, at my house, the Jerry at my house is play your electronics. Her house. Because we've been for a couple of years. So everybody's It's in the back of the book, but there's 7 pages.
All right, if I can have everybody come back together. I know you didn't get the opportunity to go through the whole thing, and I don't think that you need to go through the whole thing. You can do it later. After school session. When I stopped by, my question was, do you think this would be meaningful for all grade levels? And I just wanted you to kind of share what you were discussing with me or with other people at your table. West Central, what did y'all think about this activity, since y'all didn't want to stop?
Well, we think that not only would third graders benefit from it, but sixth graders as well. Maybe even seventh and eighth graders. We don't know.
I heard somebody say just them actually having to manipulate the text. You know, I've seen so many charts, great charts in so many rooms that tell them what the index is, that tell them a definition of a chart in a table. And they might even have a picture, but having them actually have to locate one in a book where it's not pointed out that this is what it is, I think it's very important. And even with the glossary, you know, having them look at a glossary entry and notice what the part of speech is and the pronunciation. Those are things they need to know. And the literacy teacher teaches that as well, but why not teach it in the content areas too? Yes, Mr. Summerlin.
This just to the group, when does this go away? So, like, we're halfway through 4th grade, and if I, like, as a warm-up, toss out a word, you know, or something. I mean, there's so what page, you know, and is that a common experience or no?
Yes, but
and
That's because they don't want to look it up.
I know.
I never tell them the pages.
Right.
I always say,
right, so I caught on to that, but I'm just wondering. I mean, has that? So that's common experience.
Yes.
Should it be? But when does that hit the hardest?
it's easier to say what page. For them.
It is.
Because you don't have to do the work.
Exactly. So when is it no longer hit? I mean, is that?
Them having to actually look up the
Well, like
meaning
as,
of a word?
you know, in terms of their literary standard, their literacy
Right.
standards, is that, when does that hit the hardest for them to know that cold? Or
To know the vocabulary without
don't you
having
know where to look?
How
Whether
would-
it's an index or a.
Gotcha, gotcha. Oh, gosh.
Is
That
that
really
how-
starts, I mean, I'm very familiar with all the literacy standards third up,
Yeah.
and they should know that before third grade. I mean, is that first grade, glossary?
I used to teach it in first grade when I taught first grade, but it was never in the standards.
But it's like,
So, you talk about.
it's like we were
Second grade,
talking
They do their
about.
little report, especially in the nonfiction life cycle, that is hidden.
Glossary.
But they're really reluctant. I mean, so UC's that's common.
Well,
They have stopped asking me at the beginning because they know I will not tell them. So
Right.
you hear their students
their parents tell them, look it up in the index or look it up in the glossary, because I'll ask questions like, what's the if this is the definition you have, compare it with what you find in your book. And where can I find that? And they're like, dude, don't ask them. Just look it up in the glossary. If you make it a habit of asking those questions every week, every day, and they have to rely on their own, knowledge of where to find it, then they become proficient.
And I like the idea that Mr. Sherman was saying as a warm-up. You could really do one of these tasks. Tell me what page numbers in your book you're going to find the word plant or the word plant cell. And you're going to be amazed at how many of them will start going through each page of their book, plant cell, and see which ones actually go straight to the index and know to use that. But the more that we expose them to that and just have that as a really quick do now, not only are you're really supporting those literacy standards, but you're also helping them with, vocabulary or whatnot for science as well. Ms. Griffin?
I was just going to say, as far as standards and expectations, I taught for 40 years. The first year I taught, kids asked me what page. Just the other day, somebody asked me what page. So that hasn't changed.
But it is interesting that on the flip side of that, we were working on context clues, and the one kid said, "Can I look it up in the dictionary?" And no, we're using context clues. So they wanted to take that route for the easy route instead of reading the whole thing.
Yes, there is definitely a time for both, right? Okay. Her before reading strategies. What I've done here is taken each section of her book and just really summarized each activity, told you the title, the page number you can find it on, and then the purpose of the activity. So if you, as we go through, if you say, ooh, I really like that one, you could go to your book and tab it, because like I said, when I come back with handouts, my desk is pretty clean, but usually after a training, my handouts go on my table, and I'm very guilty of not getting them put where they need to go. So maybe this will help you find things that you want to tab. The first one is called List, Group, and Label. It's on page 23 of the book. But the purpose is to build background knowledge and vocabulary. And basically it has them take vocabulary words, put them in just a regular list first, and then they categorize those, so they're working on classifying, which I know is a standard in the 5th grade. They work on classifying those words, and then they label the words based on what they have in common. That can be done, I believe, at really any grade level. The next one is called Rate Your Word Knowledge, and they basically have the vocabulary words, it's a table, and they rate how much prior knowledge they have about the word, and it's something that you could do at the beginning of a chapter. You could have them do it as a ticket out the door for the next day for you, but you would be able to take their ratings and know which words you needed to spend longer amounts of time on, which ones you needed to devote more time to building background on, and so forth. So I really liked that one as well. I thought it would be a very quick pre-activity. You could really, even if you're giving an assessment from one chapter, you could have this after the test for them to do to prepare you for the next chapter. A couple more before reading. Preview, connect, and question. Again, this time they're previewing the text. They're trying to make connections, so they're almost doing like a read, write, talk without actually reading the majority of the text. They're really noticing the sidebars, the vocabulary words, the captions, and the pictures. They're making connections. That can be done on sticky notes or in their science journals. And then they're writing questions of things that they want to know. And I noticed that we're really already doing a lot of that just by looking at the posters in the gallery walk today. Pre-teach vocabulary to build concepts. This is making a concept map, and I noticed some concept maps over here. This is going to be the next activity that we're going to do. I have some chart paper, and let's see. Let me introduce this strategy, then we'll make our concept maps. A word analysis map, very similar to a concept map, but this is just with words, actually then brainstorming their prior knowledge and putting it at different places on this map. There's a graphic organizer for that on page 31 as well. Okay, we're going to make a concept map. So what I would like you to do with the textbook at your table, and I will bring a piece of chart paper to you, but you're going to choose one lesson from the text, You'll put the concept in the middle. So I'm always going back to 5th grade. You could put plant cells in the middle. And then you would write the vocabulary words that go around that go with that topic around it. So I might put the different parts, nucleus, cell wall, so on. Then you actually read the text and you add details about each word as you read. So it ends up really looking like a web almost from Writer's Workshop. But I really liked, okay, on page 30 there's a template. And then I really liked this example that I found online. It had the term in the middle, or the concept. What is it? What is it like? And then the examples at the bottom had actual illustrations where they were drawing things. So there's so many different ways to do a concept map. There's not going to be a wrong way or a right way. So whatever approach your table takes, you can use her template on page 30. You could use this template, but we'll take maybe about 10 minutes to do one as a group, each group, and then we'll share them just so we can see some different ideas. I think you have markers at your table, and we will bring some chart paper with you.
Hi. You don't want to use the 3rd grade
Go first.
We got it.
Okay. Awesome. Way to go, May. Okay. If I can have everybody's attention, please. I want to clap and make you clap at me, but I will if I need to. Okay, thank you. Alright. So here I want you to just notice the different types of concept maps that can be created. I don't know about you, but when I first heard the term concept map a few years ago, it intimidated me a little bit. And I never knew if I was doing it the correct way, but the more research that I've done on them, every one I see is different. There's not really an incorrect way. So this would be something that you could have your students do, maybe by giving them the concept, each group have that for them, but then let them go for it. Show them some different styles. You know, they might want to use words. Some groups rely on pictures more, but letting them be creative and get down what they know, and they can use their text as a resource. So let's see what y'all learn.
Since it's the afternoon, we opted not to go for the more complicated one. We just introduce the main topic and then the offshoots of subcategories, and then the offshoots from there. We took Earth Science. 5th grade science is Earth, Physical, and Life Science, 3 different units. So we did Earth Science, and you see our categories, and then what we come up with as a group is related to solid surface, watery planet, and so on. So.
Great. Thank you very much. Awesome. All right. Question. Y'all can stay over there. We can turn to you. I'll walk all the way over here.
We're just, one thing that kind of hits us is we have 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th all here together. And it's amazing how much of our standards just tend to overlap, and you know, we teach the same thing, it's just a little more depth at each level. So we chose weathering, and weathering is breaking down of rock, and then some examples. We put sand on the beach, cracks in the sidewalk, the Grand Canyon. I think our kids all know the Grand Canyon is an example of erosion weathering. The Appalachian Mountains, and then just some, you know, what is it like, wind carries rock, putting vinegar on chalk. That's a good example. If you're just teaching weathering at 3rd grade level, but 6th grade, 5th grade, chemical weathering, because so you're going to introduce that concept. Plants growing on the sidewalk, movement of glaciers, rivers moving, river rocks. You go to Home Depot, bring that in. Kids like to pass it around, but that just helps kind of make that a little more concrete. And waves, and a lot of things. We were talking about PowerPoints with pictures. I know, and it's really struck me today, within Rome City, we have different personalities for different schools, and some of your schools have students that do not grow up in a home where English is the language. And like you were saying, you have to have something for them to study at home so they can self-check. I think that's brilliant on your part. But we also, we try to have pictures and show a lot of pictures, because a lot of our students have not had experiences. It's hard to teach oceanography to a child who's never been to the ocean.
Or they think that Rocky Mountain Beach, that that's the beach and that's the ocean.
Right. So you know, yeah, so we really need to try to give them some experiences and bring in what we can. And that's one of the things Miss Bailey and I were talking about.
And that would be a great addition to one of these, you know, putting the different photographs so they can have a realistic picture. Right, thank you very much. Next up, I keep looking at action. I really appreciate it. Would y'all like to share? Just very creative, another different idea.
We did adaptations and plant animals, and we just made a little human plant as our picture. So the ability to change and survive, and then we have the examples on the ears, and then we have survival. I think that's one of the most important ones on the neck. And then behavior, camouflage, getting food, and defense. We didn't really get the completely sure the examples.
So, very creative. Thank you. All right, Southeast, would y'all like to share?
And we were looking at the kingdoms, and so we webbed off of each kingdom and then gave some examples, and then each one of the smaller circles has an opportunity you can web and give more examples and go into more content and examples of that.
And I could really see that, you know, even if the teacher gave kingdom in the middle and had the different kingdoms going around, but then said, okay, use these pages in your textbook to find details about each different kingdom. Each kingdom you need to have 3 to 4 details with 2 examples. You know, really giving them a purpose and letting them go and locate it in the textbook. Nice, thank you. West Central. I like y'all's illustrations.
Best are artists. Y'all little pictures for everything. Which helps our kids a lot because a lot of them don't, their families don't speak English. So we have ecosystems and then things related and then examples of ecosystems.
Very nice. I think pictures are really important for that, especially they don't have the experiences like we were talking about. East Central. They were just spitting this out. I walked over and I was like, goodness gracious. And Ms. Dahl said, I just taught this unit.
So we just did your basic mapping with chemical change, described what it was. It says a change in matter. Where a new substance forms, characteristics, energy is always exchanged, new matter is produced, old matter is gone. We talked about clues of how we know it's happening, bubbling, tarnishing, I didn't write all of them down, rusting, changing color, temperature, fire, burning, explosion, which the boys love explosions.
Yeah.
And then on the what it's like with the examples, I tried to put down things that they might see at home, everyday life, paper burning, cooking an egg or waffles, fireworks, exploding, iron is rusting, toasting a marshmallow, so that they could see that those kinds of changes are happening all around us, not just, you know, in a lab.
Right. That covers a lot of what they need to know for physical things. Great. And let's see, Gary and the Elm Street ladies.
Actually, this is an example of an activity that my classroom children would do. Occasionally, at the end of a chapter that we cover, they just get a word list and they work together and they figure out how to map the words.
Cool.
And this would be what they should come up with this word list. And they can keep adding, like Laura was saying, they can keep adding to it. If you want to put more things, for instance, under waves, wind, of course, is what creates that movement, but they can go on and say the faster the wind's blowing, the higher the wave, and that sort of thing. But basically, you've got ocean water movement. That's the concept. And you talk about waves, tides, surface currents, deep currents, and then what creates those particular movements. And then we have our beautiful little picture of the Earth being pulled between the sun and the moon.
Great.
So,
Great, thank you. Okay, awesome. Everybody got here, right? Thank you for participating and doing that. I just think it's great for us to leave here with lots of different examples of some of these different things so we can go back and try the ones that we think will work in our own rooms. Now we'll move on to the during reading strategies. These are about self-monitoring as they read and how students know if they are understanding or not, and how you can help them create a little bag of tricks, so to speak, to help monitor their reading. The sticky note strategy, I think we are all familiar with that. Teachers go through sticky notes these days. I have never seen anything like it. but having them jot down as they read, you could easily use their interactive notebook or however you have them take notes, but have them jot down as they read words that they don't understand and questions that they have. That really kind of goes with the read, write, talk strategy, but that is a really meaningful way just to have them check for understanding as they read. We think, assigning pages and just let them read on their own and then answering the questions. By asking them to do something like this as they go, you're really going to cut down on them having to go back and reread. I know when I take notes as I read, it tends to sink in a little bit better, and I think it's sometimes it's the same for our students. So that's a good strategy. Read, pause, retell, and evaluate. This really reminds me of PALS when you look at it. They, with a partner, can do this. They'll read a section, they'll stop, they'll retell that section, and then they can go back and forth with their partner and do this, and at the end, they evaluate their learning together, and that could be based on a prompt that you give them to do a quick write-on, a prompt that you give them to have a discussion over. It really is wide open, and she lists some different strategies for the evaluate in that section. I was going to have us do PALS right here, but since you've all seen it, I think you saw a presentation over it, most of you have tried it, I don't think that we need to try it. I had to leave that training early that day, so I did not realize it had been covered. But anyways, if you haven't, I haven't forgotten after this to show you how to get to the timer on the E5. Perfect. Again, some fix-up strategies during reading. Reread or close read. I'm sure you've heard the literacy teachers talking about close reading. That is where you really zoom in on a section of the text and you have some higher level questions for them to answer as they read. You really notice vocabulary in that section. You cannot close read the whole chapter in the science book. That's not realistic. It would take forever. But if you find a chunk of the text that you feel is extremely significant or meaningful, you might want to stop and bring them together for that part of the text. Really go through it with them. Having them go through and jot down the words that they don't know. Having them jot down questions and really facilitating that for them to help them gain a better understanding of that part. The next one is using context clues to build vocabulary and strategies for pronouncing words. Again, this is a strategy that they're learning in the literacy classroom, but if it could be supported in the content areas, that would be great. Several different clues, strategies for context clues. She talks about how within a sentence you may have the vocabulary word, and then it may be set off with the definition as a positive, with a comma. I mean, you could even throw in some grammar there. Reading the next, sometimes the vocabulary word is in one sentence, but they have to read on to the next sentence to actually find the definition. So really going through and finding the different examples of ways to find meanings of words without heading towards the glossary. We call this sometimes a word wizard strategy. They're going to be word wizards, and they're not going to get to use their glossary. They're 5 words, and we're going to see how we can find clues within the text to come up with the meaning of those words. That's a really huge literacy standard that can be supported in science and social studies. After reading, this is something they would do after they read, just to make sure that they have understood it. It could be the evaluation, synthesizing what they're learning, a word map, which kind of goes along with the concept mapping. They could also do the word map during reading. She offers that strategy at 2 places in the book. Think with heading notes. This is basically where they learn how to write notes from the text. You could tell them that they're going to use the subheadings in the chapter. You could set it up as a jigsaw, but tell them how many facts you want them to put under each heading. Just getting used to outlining. I like to give them an outline, give them a heading, and maybe put some facts, and then have a bank of facts and say, can you find the one that's missing that goes there? Can they classify that information and group things together? So that's all mentioned in her strategy number 11. It says students use the subheadings from the text and and write important facts from each section. After jotting down notes, students respond to 2 questions. So you could have them study their notes and say, what does this information mean and why is it important? Those could be answered in a turn and talk situation, or again, always an opportunity to have them do just like a 5-minute quick write in their science notebook. Question, answer, connect, react. This, this one they go through, they generate questions based on the text feature. So they do this one all throughout. They would start by generating questions before reading. Then they would read and they would find the answer. And last, they would make a connection to something else, maybe in the real world, or their reaction to that. Like, wow, I didn't know this is, how such and such worked. But just again, getting them to always critically think about what it is they're reading. After reading, this is another strategy that I look at this, and we use this with informational writing all the time. This really lends itself to me more to social studies than science, but the 5 W's, the who, what, where, when, why, and then how, but giving them that blank organizer, especially in history, and having them fill that out as they go. Miss Griffin just used this with her writing piece that she had them do. They've been studying the early astronomers, and she gave them a graphic organizer and allowed them to get the iPads and conduct some research using Britannica Online. So she really focused their research to one particular site, and they had to find all of this information about their astronomer. So it wasn't just wide open, and it gave her something that she could easily take for a grade, but then they used that to write their reports. The collaborative review sheets, this is where they are working together and they're actually creating the study sheet. So if you know what you're going to be assessing them over, you might have that discussion, what do they think that they need to know from this lesson or this unit, and allow them to come up and generate test questions and generate their own study sheets to go with that.
I've done this before. I've had them come up with 5 or 10 test questions. What do you think over this unit should be a test question? And they're much harder than I would do.
See, that's great.
They pick out these tiny little details.
And then I think it might give them more of a purpose and maybe motivation to do well on it. If they know that you're letting them have a hand in creating the test questions, and then that they're going to be creating their own review sheet as well. Everybody studies differently. I mean, that's one thing we teach them is how to study. But I don't necessarily study and memorize like you do. So for some, note cards are appropriate, but for others, maybe not. And so having them make a study sheet or note cards that would be meaningful for them and help them study that they can take home. Okay, after reading again, this really goes with some of the writing we just did. I like this a lot. It was them coming up with a hypothesis, okay? They had a positive, same topic, but they had to write a positive hypothesis and a negative hypothesis, and then they had to support it with information from the text. It gives you passages in the back of this resource, this Laura Robb book, that you can use for this. I don't think the passages would be appropriate for 3rd and 4th grade. I think they would be more appropriate. Definitely 6th can handle it. I'm not even sure that 5th could, but you could take this exact lesson and try it with the passage they give you, and then you can just find some passages on your own. I mean, the Ed Helper stuff, going online, finding an article, but it just teaches them to go back and find evidence from the text to support these hypotheses that they're making. And again, I'm sure you've heard your reading teachers saying evidence from the text. That's huge this year. Having to go back and prove it with evidence from the text. So that's something you could do in science and social studies as well. And then I just have to give credit to Laura Robb because those were all of her ideas and not mine. And some of it I just used her exact words. So that's just basically a walk through that book. I really think it's a resource, a valuable resource that you can use at all grade levels. I'm glad that we purchased it across the system. And hopefully you are going to walk out of here feeling like you're more familiar with it. So thank you for listening and participating in my activities. Your audience. Next, let's see, do you need a break? You need a 5-minute break, 10-minute break to go to the restroom, or do you want to jump into the next? I have to let you go. I'm sorry, I have to let you go at like 2:30, 2:35, so I can clean the library up and I can go ride my bus. Unless one of you want to ride it.
Wants to volunteer.
Unless one of you want to be the lucky winner.
You're
So-
going to show that RC.
Yes, thank you, Anita. I'm going to show the RCSE file. A lot of the computers in your school, they already have this address in. It's kind of weird. It's a bunch of numbers, but once you put it into your computer one time, it will stay there. Okay? So you're going to go to Start. You're going to go to Start, and then you'll go to Run. Okay? Oh, there it is. And when you get to Run, you might want to write this down, but your coach knows it too, but if you want to write it down, you can. You do //, 1 0 period 0 period 3 period 7 5 /, and that's not right. There's no capitals. Lowercase RCS. Oh, he says the caps might not matter. Lowercase RCS and then a space. Make sure that you put a space, not an underscore, but just a space. Teacher. I always use a capital T, but we're about to see if it works with a lowercase t. It probably does. It does? Okay, so teacher, lowercase or capital, you pick. Another space, and then data. So you type that in, and you press OK. It will take a few seconds, maybe even 30 seconds for it to come up, so don't think that you've done something wrong. Here it comes. And this was created, Mr. Harkin, did you make this for us?
No, David Smith did that.
David Smith made it. Okay, so when you see David Smith, tell him thank you. You can access this from any school networked computer, but basically you'll see the RCS teacher training. You don't have to do that, but the RCS teacher training folder that will have a lot of the things that we cover in our meetings. When Kay says I'm going to put it on the RCSE file, like she took pictures of all those posters. That's where she'll be dropping that, and they'll be assigned. Oh, they're already there. She is good. So she's already downloaded the pictures she's taken and put them in this e-file on the science folder for you to see. Jennifer, where is the PALS timer?
It's actually in the RCS teacher training folder.
Okay.
And then there's a science and social studies folder, and it's inside there. Good.
There it is, PALS timers.
And I will add the PALS rubric.
Great. All your jigsaw stuff and text mapping codes from the training at Maine that you did in social studies, that's all there. But this is awesome. I went into 6th grade to do PALS, and I was going to model it in the literacy room. We didn't really have to model very much because the directions are on each slide and they're so explicit that we modeled for maybe 10 seconds each thing, really to model their behavior, like their voice level, their body, what they should be doing. It was awesome. Sometimes it's slow just because it's... Okay. So, there we go. So it tells you, I mean, first, partner A reads. You made them, put them in groups. You could ask the literacy teacher if she already has them paired. You can get their lexiles and see appropriate people to pair together. But partner A would read, then partner B is tracking along and helping with words and sentences. That's 5 minutes. Then the roles reverse, the exact same thing. They take turns retelling for 2 minutes. So I would retell something, then you would retell. I would retell, you would retell. And then here comes the paragraph shrinking. So who or what was it about? What is the main thing that happened in 10 words or less? Again, now it's the other partner's turn to do paragraph shrinking. The prediction relay, where they're making predictions about what they think they're going to read next. partner A, then partner B, and that's it. So that timer is a huge help. It keeps you on track. You're not having to watch your watch or your clock in your room, and it gives the directions to the kids. So that's easy to use. Okay, it is 5 till 2. For the last 35 minutes, what we're going to do is get back with our grade levels. I'm going to give each grade level chart paper, and you've got a marker, and a coach is going to come sit with each group. And really, we need your help. We need to know what you're thinking as far as your curriculum map goes. I know that we created curriculum maps a few years ago, maybe 2 in Rome City. But I want you to discuss at your grade level. And be honest. Are you using that map? Are you staying on it? Because I feel like sometimes we're not necessarily all together, and we want to be cohesive and be as close together as possible. This is going to be an approximation. We're not going to hold you to it by the actual day, but we're writing literacy units, and a lot of the books that we're putting in have a tie-in with social studies or science, and it would really make sense if our units meshed with what they're learning. For example, I know in 5th grade they're reading Number of the Stars. We have not gotten to World War II yet in our social studies, but maybe some have. So it would be a great discussion to say, how long do you spend on the Civil War? And really compromise and figure out how long we want to do everything. I printed out for you to have as a guide. You may have brought it with you, but the suggested maps from the state, you may use this, you may not use this. But what we would like your group to come up with today is just a framework of how many weeks you would like to spend on each unit, the order you would like those units to happen in, and then if you could just put an asterisk by units or topics that you think would lend to using the science writing heuristic model. Okay, so order, you want the scope and sequence, how many weeks per unit, and then ones that you think would lend to making a claim, supporting it with evidence from an experience. Gary Jones.
Are we getting back logistics anytime soon? Because that's where we spent most of our time creating these,
we created them.
frameworks and curriculum maps.
I'm not sure if we're having staff development from just right now. I know we had hired them to consult with us for a few years, but I'm not sure if that's, or do we still work with them?
They were incredible.
She's been doing some professional learning that most of it is after school hours. And she still comes to help with like science times. And that's she won't come to the classroom, but in terms of the writing units.
Right.
We have not.
I almost took that job.
So, and you may get together and you may have a map that you like that you're using. So if you would just sketch that out for us, there might not have to be a lot of redoing and recreating, but we just want to make sure now that you're here together, give you a time to meet together as a grade level with someone, people from the other schools, determine the order you're going to teach the units in. Are you going to follow the textbook order? Are you going to follow the state suggested order? Or do you have another order about how many weeks you're going to spend on each one and which ones, and you're the ones who teach it every day, you're in there doing it, you know the ones that would lend to doing the science writing heuristic model or not. We're also going to do this at the social studies training at the end of February. So we're going to have a good document for science and social studies. If I can get one person from each grade level to come get this chart paper, please.
Let's go back to the table we were at.
Sure, yeah, that'd be a good idea.
Back to the drawing.
We start with the chemical physical first, and then jump into just skip around.
So that you've got static. What did you got?
Well, see, because they haven't broken up, so I'm wondering, should we do chemical, physical, and then do earth, let's say, and then go back to